Yeah, and then if you don't mind, start off with the same, what we're asking everybody, and we'll take it from there. But we have Leaha Skylar here, who's been on, and is that the name that you want to use, Leaha?
Yeah.
I noticed. Okay.
Yeah, Jimmy, that's good.
All right.
Leaha Skylar is good.
Chair of Young Democrats, also managing the campaign for Denise Kirchoff, who sits next to her, who is running for Washtenaw County Commissioner.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome to Jazz Cabbage Cafe. Now you've been watching for a little bit. You've heard the conversation. What we're talking about is, at what point do we feel like the current protests are more justified than the protests that we saw previously objecting to Governor Gretchen Whitmer's stay-at-home orders, which involved armed men taking over the legislature, essentially at the Capitol building, the several different protests. I think all of us are in agreement that we feel that the current issue is far more pressing and far more directly dangerous to our health and welfare than that previous issue was. And also that we've reached a better point in our coronavirus response to be able to gather in larger groups. But I'm curious to know, both of you, what is your opinion about what we talked about?
Well, I can totally see why we're protesting about what happened to Mr. Floyd. I am the mother of a biracial young man. And I heard everybody talking about the police and how they treat people. In our neighborhood, our son actually moved out because we were having an issue. Our neighbors, every time he worked on his car, would call the police, and they would lie. They'd say, oh, he's playing loud music. Oh, he's doing this. Oh, he's doing that. And it just kept escalating. And it just happens that his dad works from home quite a bit. He's an engineer. He works from home. And the police kept coming to my house. And being a Black woman myself, I know what eventually happens. I've seen, the fake phone calls. Oh, this guy is assaulting me. This guy is hitting me. This Black guy. And then at first it was like, the guy next door is loud. The guy next door is working on his car because him and his friends, they buy cars and they drift out at MIS. They drift their cars. So anytime he walked out that door, the Washtenaw County Sheriff's was at my house. And then the one time, and I started to confront them. And my husband is like, you just calm down. I'm like, no, I'm not calming down. You have no reason to be at my house. So people were lying, and they were lying. And finally, I told my husband, I said, what eventually is going to happen before the last time they came, I said, they're going to say there's a Black man in the garage fighting, and he's got a gun, and they're going to kill my son. And the police, it just so happened my son was working on his car, didn't have a battery in it. They're like, oh, there's a Black guy, tons of music. He's loud. He might be smoking dope. We don't know what he's doing. And now the sheriff had been called so many times, and usually it was the same one. At this particular time, we got a Black officer, and we didn't even know he was there. So he sat back for 10 minutes, and he came up and he said, yeah, I got a report. I said, my son walked out the house. Of course you got a report. Now I should tell you, my son is about 6'6", 289 pounds, and he works out. And so people see him as this big Black guy. And they came up and the guy said, I sat for 10 minutes. They're like, we didn't hear a sound. And my son was so upset, he just started throwing tools. And I said, Devin, just calm down. I said, you know what? There's not even a battery in the car. He could not crank the car. But this is what happens to people of color. Now, I live in Ypsilanti Township. The part of Ypsilanti I live in is less than 12% people of color. So there's me and another neighbor on the block that happen to be people of color. Now, who do you think called? If I had lived in another neighborhood and literally we had about 8 visits every time my son walked out the door to work on his car, the sheriff was called on my son. It got so frustrating. He said, you know what, Mom? I think I'm going to move out. And the neighbors are standing outside staring. And it just so happens on my block, guess who lives? A retired Ann Arbor police sergeant. Wonder who called all the time. Now, we've all heard about that scenario. How eventually was that going to go? Because we told them. I said, I'm going to file. I said, who called? They won't tell us. I said, I'm going to file a FOIA. I'm putting cameras outside of my house. I said, because eventually what's going to happen is you're going to come and you're going to be drawing down on my son. He's going to stand up with a wrench in his hand and you're going to put a bullet in his chest. And they eventually stopped coming. I actually tried to call the sheriff. He wouldn't call me back. They told me to call Derek Anderson. Still waiting for that call back. This happened last summer. So that's been my experience, you know, just with my son. He literally had to move out of our house because every time he walked to the garage, some neighbor called the police on him for just being alive.
Could you explain who Derek Anderson is, just for context for our viewers?
Derek Anderson is the community resource officer in Washtenaw County.
Thank you.
So his role is to go between us and the community. And one of the reasons I'm running for office is because I don't feel like there's accountability or accessibility to our officials. I was talking to Leah about, you know, when I saw all of this going on, I think every community should have a community commission to police our police. It should not be made up of police officers. Do you really think a police officer is going to police a police officer? There needs to be a community board that you report to every week. These are the complaints we got against our officers. There needs to be a board in every community that people can go to when they feel like, you know what, this officer did me wrong. This officer did this. Because when you go and call the duty sergeant, they take it down, but they are trained to try to talk you out of filing a report by threatening, well, maybe like in Detroit, you hear like a lot of my friends say, well, you know, this officer treated me really bad. I called the duty sergeant, and a duty sergeant goes, well, you were pulled over because you didn't have any car insurance. We could make that worse. Now, do you want to file a report? It's like, what are you doing? What are you saying? You have just told that person right then and there, well, if you file this report, we could make this a lot worse on you. But I think if you have community commissioners who oversee our police department and who has the ability to go in and who are trained to do their own investigations into bad behavior in a police department and who can make recommendations on police officers that live in your community, I think you wield a lot of power. But one of the problems we have is we have a lot of people in office that have been there for 20, 30, 40 years. They don't want to change because they're buddies with all of these people.
Let me give you some good news from Flint. Yesterday at the rally that we had out in front of City Hall, Mayor Sheldon Neely announced a program very similar to what you suggested, with a commission that includes Black Lives Matter that will be in an advisory capacity to the Flint City Police Department, and they will have investigative powers and they will be mostly citizen-led. So that's a great program to jump off on where you're talking about. And oftentimes it just takes one to start. Isn't that true with government?
I told Leah, we are talking to a judge, we are talking to some lawyers. We will actually, hopefully by Wednesday, be able to launch and put on our webpage what we're looking to do. Because you know what? I have one of those sons, because here's the thing. In some communities, they see him as white, and some communities, they see him as black. And my son is also a CPL holder. Nicest kid in the world. But here's the thing. He's not going to take trash from anybody. He feels like, you know what, I'm an American. I live here. My rights are just as important as yours. Just because you wear a badge and you carry a gun does not give you the right to step on anybody or to hurt anybody. Like, we had an incident here in Washtenaw County where it was last Tuesday.
Well, yeah, I don't know if you guys heard or not, but, you know, there have been several incidents throughout the nation that have happened. And then in Ypsi Township, I think a lot of times coming from Washtenaw County, people think that there's not as many issues, but there still really is this intense bias. And we actually had a sheriff's officer who was on video, like using extreme force and just like punching this woman's head. And
he body slammed her. I mean, his excuses.
And it shocked everyone because
we,
to some degree, kind of felt like we had reached a point. And I will say, like, our sheriff's office has tried for the past 10 years to really build relationships. But like a lot of people thought we reached a point where it was safe here, and then that happened and the community was like, hell no, like this can't keep happening. So that led to these marches happening. And what you were talking about, Rick, the prosecutor came up because our current prosecutor, as this started, wanted to handle this case. How can you do that when these are your county sheriffs that you know,
right, that you work with every
that you
day.
golf with, your kid goes to the same school, right? There's bias.
So, Denise, not intended to be a solution, but as county commissioner, or do the county commissioners have influence over the sheriff's department? If so, like how much? And do you have other commissioners that are like-minded that may help in some manner as far as influencing with some of this stuff, or any kind of direction that they?
Hang on, wait a minute. I can kind of solve this.
Yeah, I was gonna say Colin works too for commissioner.
She can sit on like different boards, so she like oversees the county prosecutor's budget, and she also sees over the sheriff's budget, and they have to approve those budgets. So she could sit on like the Department of Homeland Security, and probably there's a couple. What other committees would you, I guess?
Well, there's Homeland Security, and there's also, oh my goodness, I can't think of it.
But that makes
what
sense.
I was actually
Government
looking to do-
operations, I think, is another
Sure.
one.
Right.
But by way of
Yeah.
negotiating what they can use their budget for, you can be influential on policy for
Right.
them too.
Yeah.
But what I was looking for, and it's not necessarily, because a lot of times what your constituency is what they want to call a power grab. To me, it's not a power grab to legitimately go through the process with the state and the attorney general to legitimately add a county commissioner board with power. I don't mean in name only, because in Washtenaw County, I love Washtenaw County. We have a lot of, what would we call it? We have a lot of organizations that are in name only. You truly have no power. I mean, it looks great, it sounds great when you're moving here, but I am talking a legitimate, valid board.
Do you
where
think such a
commissioners are trained,
you think such a
where
board?
you-
I'm sorry.
Beg your pardon?
Do you
No,
think
go
such a
ahead.
board? Do you think such a board solves a lot of the issues, or is it just kind of something to get started with while a larger overhaul of
I think we're at a starting
years of
point.
an embedded broken system need to be
I
addressed?
think we're at a starting point, and I expect pushback, because you have to realize, in a lot of communities, you're running against people who've been in office for 20 and 30 years, and they like things the way they are. You know, things are fine. They like it the way they are. I'm sure somebody's going to come up with the idea, oh, let's have some oversight, and it's going to be a name only, and this time next year, it will not exist. But we need a solution to a problem that's just not based in Washtenaw County, just not in Detroit, just not in Flint, and just didn't start with Mr. Floyd. Like I said,
Yeah.
this is I won't even say a nationwide problem. This is a problem worldwide. I think we are at the precipice of an extreme change.
Yeah.
And we need a legitimate starting point. We don't need the fluff and the, oh, let me get on TV or let me get on your show and say, oh yeah, I need more power. I need more oversight. No, we need a valid board that is approved by our state and by our attorney general, that has real power in the communities we live in and in communities that we all travel to. Because the reality is that no matter what you do, a police officer is going to protect a police officer. So
But-
why would I let you oversee the discipline of somebody, like you say, that you play golf with, or that your daughter is babysitting their kids? Oh yeah, that's gonna work out real well for our communities.
Is there another commission at a county level that has the type of power that you're ascribing to the
No.
county level?
Outside of like what Colin's talking about, where you could really influence some of the financial
I
stuff.
mean, a commission that you can point to that says, this is the kind of teeth that I want for this issue.
So I can
Or
tell
are
that
you
there-
looking at a brand new level of control that we've not seen at a county level before?
There are
You
councils
could do
and
it in the
commissions
Senate,
that,
probably, or like the House.
yeah, I'd agree. And I think we have a lot of councils and committees in Washtenaw, but like what happens is sometimes one person may be leading it, it's doing a lot of great work, and then that one human leaves. And as long as they were there, it was influential and powerful. But like as soon as that one vocal voice is gone,
The power is
it
gone.
becomes, oh well, that's just a board, and it's like, but no, this is supposed to be a committee that has oversight. So I think that we have a foundation. I wouldn't argue that it's currently existing at the same level that I think Denise is looking for.
Well,
It's
I'd like
much
to say
easier
something
much
real quick,
easier to
if
get
I
what you
can.
want. Go ahead, Roach. You're up.
Yeah.
You're on.
You know, it's like I think we can all agree that, you know, the protest and all this First Amendment activity is as a result of people feeling unheard. And even in the face of all of this, people are still unheard. And I kind of feel like it's because they're speaking a different language. We forget that the police department and all of this, they're a business. And these quote unquote bad cops are good for their business.
Yeah,
And
their quotas, right?
you know, they have an incentive to look past that. And they have incentives and motivation to play golf and all of that. And when we talk about how we're gonna, you know, fix it and come down on that, you know, it kind of seems like then we're now talking about like downsizing police forces and taking back funding and diverting funding. And then now you're like against public safety. So, you know, maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of where we are right now, but eventually, how do we get people to understand that this is what we need to do? Because as long as we keep that salary cap and all this money going in there, they're using it, number one, to buy equipment to fuck us the fuck up. As we can
I mean,
see
we no, you're right.
No, I've seen
And-
those. I was at
about-
Detroit. I saw the riot cops. It's terrifying.
You're right. I think what we need to look at is who's leading our police departments. I think
Well, that's important because our sheriff's up for election this year.
right. I think we need to look at the leaders of our police department, and we have to probably redefine what is our police here for. What are they?
Really, we
what
need to
is
look at the
police-
teachers too, though. The teachers that are teaching the
Yeah.
police. How
Right.
about the academies? You know, how about
The paramilitary techniques and things, yes.
Right,
Exactly.
exactly.
how about
So you
the
talk about
youth?
reform. That's some of
You know,
those things.
I
You know, we
hate to put the
ban
union
those.
out there
Right,
and see
like,
them as being the
I-
problem, but they're allowing all these police. They're backing up all these police. They're trying to keep this policeman on a payroll so
That's
they
the
can
need for the
collect
independent
that
third party that
funds.
oversees
You know
that
what I mean?
for that
Like,
reason.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
crazy.
everybody's unheard because we're not talking about money.
It is all about money.
It's
For
a
them, I
capitalist
mean,
society.
For them, it's all about money because they are, like you guys said, they're a business.
Right,
I mean, when
Right.
we were in Ann Arbor yesterday at the march, something that both Senator Irwin and also Ellie Savitt, who's running for Washtenaw County Prosecutor, talked about is the police have been screwing the people over and been violent for a long time. I know you guys all know a lot about civil asset forfeiture. Like, it is a business that that our current police system has created to really use and abuse the people in a variety of ways. So when we start talking about reforms and defunding, that's going to have to be a multi-attack. And I mean, it needs to be quick and it needs to be done. But I think there's multiple levels.
no level of accountability right now, because if you look at a lot of police departments, excuse me, there's no level of accountability except for another department, and it's usually the state police. And it's, if you sort of notice, if you look, like whenever something like this happens, do you notice the one thing you don't see involved is the state police? It's always, before they call in the state police, they will call in the National Guard, or they will call in another police department, because the state police is supposed to be the investigative arm for all police departments.
Well, and that's why
So-
Dana's getting involved in Washtenaw. Our AG Dana Nessa will actually be involved in overseeing this case that's happened in Washtenaw County.
Right.
That's what they're supposed to be doing.
Right, and I think if we sort of look at like the structure and the discipline of what happens on the state police level and say, you know what, maybe that's some of the same structure and discipline we need on our local levels, because it's a lot harder for a state police officer, when a state police officer is involved and someone accusing them of doing something inappropriate, or someone accusing them of, you know, hurting them. A state police officer, before anything is done, you're removed from the job. You come out of your car right now, your shift is done. You go home until we stop. But other officers throughout the state, you know what? They get to finish until enough people complain, and they go, oh yeah, 2 weeks later, oh yeah, we're gonna put them on a what do you call, paid administration leave. But with the state police, it's very different. The complaint comes, you stop working until because they're investigators. That's what they do. Until we find out what happens, you are off the streets right then and there. How many officers stay on the streets until enough of us cry foul, there's something wrong? how many of them are still patrolling the streets until enough people complain and say something, and then all of a sudden they're put on administrative leave or sent home? So I think we're looking at how police departments do this in a very different way. I mean, in the beginning, they're allowed to police themselves. I mean, how many of us really think that's a good idea?
Well, and there are a lot of images coming in from the protests of some police policing other police at these protests. So like I've seen where, you know, you see like the one officer who everyone's touting as like the good hero, but she should not be having to go, wait, no, we don't need to use that violence. It should not be on one officer on that field to like literally be like, wait guys, that's not our training, let's bring back. We shouldn't have that aspect going.
Let me just say that Roach touched on a really important subject that I think we kind of glossed over. The police unions have great control over what techniques are approved, over what discipline can be enacted, over how things are handled, over how people are hired, fired, and whether you can take them off the force or not. I think so. When we start talking about the change in the police union that's necessary to accomplish what we're dealing with as far as inequality on the part of the police force itself, that's a major thing to do. Roach, I know you were about to take off, but I hope it was to talk about that issue.
Yeah, no, I don't know. It just seems like we already have enough laws to tell each other that we're all human. Like, I hate that we're going to start now playing this game of like coming up with the magical incantation of laws that are going to make people see other people as human. And it's just not going to happen.
That's such an awful phrase. Make people see people as human. You're totally right.
You're right. And you know,
it's deeper than that. You know, these people's motivation is money, and they are desensitized. The first person, like, here's the sad part about it. I said it last night. The worst part about this is the first person that these officers and these military people lose their emotions for, and all of that, is for themselves in basic training. They learn to zone out, you know, and they don't even feel a certain way about themselves. And the level of domestic violence that's associated with that demographic and all of that, it's deeper than laws and psychological training. Like,
you're talking about a culture reset, which I 100% think that's a discussion that we could dive into too, because you're right. We could set up advisory boards, but there's a lot of just changing people and changing culture.
Well, you have to
changes a stair step. It's not a single switch. Go ahead.
Right. You have to understand, police officers, once you get that badge and that gun, you have power. I mean, and it is, I don't think they're appropriately taught how to deal with that. So I think that's why a lot of that spills over into their private life. I used to have I still do have a brother. He was originally a police officer in Highland Park. He moved to California. He became a duty training sergeant, and of all places, Compton, California, which is one of, at the time, was one of the worst places there was. But I looked at their level of accountability. Anytime their gun was fired in Compton, your duty sergeant automatically showed up, took your weapon. Every one of your bullets every day had to be accounted for. There was a certain level of training. They pulled them back, and people call California the touchy-feely place. They take them in and say, what were you feeling when you fired that gun? How did that make you feel? If you hit that person, you know, it was like a process.
Well, there's a psychological impact.
But there's an impact to, you know, and there's, you know, you feel a certain way when you are able to take a life. And what they do is they pull people back and say, okay, you have to sit down for a while because we have to deal with this, we have to process this, and we have to see what's going on with you. We don't do that in a lot of police departments. I mean, you train somebody for a year, you give them a gun, and you say, that's your target, which is unfortunately usually a Black person. Go out there and get them and protect the world, protect your community from them. Because as we know, you know, I don't think we would have this problem if there wasn't so much institutionalized racism, where people of color are always considered the villain, you know, the person who's going to attack you, the Black guy's going to steal your purse, he's going to rape all the white women. Oh, and that Black woman, she's out to rob you too. So I think, you know, it's also going to take a cultural shift. And I think that's what we're seeing, because the police, just like everybody else, is being told who the bad person is.
Yeah.
And that's who they're going after, and that's who supposedly is suffering. So I think there's going to be a lot of shifting, but I think right now, everybody has finally decided there needs to be a cultural shift,
Yeah.
not just a shift in the police department, but a cultural shift in the way we think, in the way we behave, and things that we have been taught. I think it's a process where we are all going to have to relearn a lot.
Culture
Because-
doesn't obey national boundaries either. Our culture expresses in Europe and in Canada, all over the place. Go ahead, Berg. I know you're on it.
No, I was just going to say, you know, she keeps on bringing up teach and taught and all that. I mean, that has a lot to do with the academy and where they were taught. And
You're right.
Well, and who's
And-
teaching them? The teachers. If the
Right.
teachers are from this old system and they stay in that, even if we set up safety boards, you're continuing that like mentality.
Right.
Oh,
Like,
even after leaving the academy, they have their, you know, their training officer teaching them all the little nooks and crannies that they couldn't legally teach them in the academy. You know what I mean? Like, so
you're right.
They stick together like glue. I'm telling you, they
And like, you know, we have to give the police credit though, because like, who's gonna run into a building right now? Which one of us? Okay, you gotta get in a certain state of mind.
Right.
There's
Fair
a
fight.
certain level of commitment that you have to commit to get to
Oh,
you
you're
know,
right.
be a cop and do some
You're right.
real cop ass shit.
But respect for accomplishment doesn't necessarily abdicate
Mhm.
someone from responsibility for actions, though.
Yeah, no, and like,
You can steal that one. It was a good one.
yeah, no, they need to know when to turn that on, when it's necessary. Or, you know, do we have two different kinds of cops? Like, you know, we can't just throw these guys away because like obviously America keeps turning out this breed. It's obviously necessary for something. So
When we
what
hire
is it?
When we hire police officers and we say we'd like to hire ex-veterans, one of the reasons they want to do that just because they have weapons experience, because they know how to follow orders, and they know what it really means to duty and have honor and things like that. And I love my vets, I do, but I don't think a lot of the people that come out of the military are really the type of protect and serve individuals that I would like to see be hired first when it comes to police officers. So
Yeah,
I
they're
think
search and destroy.
and there's a ton of vets that are completely competent. And that's why I ask for, as I mentioned earlier in the show, a psychological evaluation of violent tendencies and things prior to hiring. Because just because you can shoot the hell out of an M16 and you know how to follow orders pretty good doesn't necessarily mean you're the right person to be able to handle that domestic violence situation where the family turns on you and you go from the peacekeeper to being a defender. Now you have to decide whether you're going to react in a violent way to the loved ones in their own home, or whether you're going to de-escalate the situation by using techniques you've been taught. So when Berg talks about teachers and trainers, teaching them those nonviolent de-escalation situations instead of teaching them chokeholds is probably a better use of their time.
And he was pointing out that
something
Denise
proposed.
brought that up. I'm sorry, go ahead, Leah.
No, something that I'd seen proposed by a lot of people was the idea of federally right now they could ban like chokeholds. Like that could be a
Right.
thing that they just straight up say, here you go. I mean, instead, we're out there marching against police brutality and it's being met by acts of intimidation and police brutality. And there are some things that they could at least throw a bone out there and kind of be like, hey,
Well,
we
I
hear
mean,
you.
really, like the George Floyd thing wasn't even a chokehold. The motherfucker was kneeling on his
No.
fucking
Right.
neck.
No,
Like,
that
that's
was
no
yeah.
chokehold.
That's ridiculous.
Again, I
And
said a
don't-
bone, throw a bone.
But this is all on a backdrop, by the way, of our president of the United States of America, who's escalated the situation. We haven't talked about him at all, but it would be wrong to have this conversation without pointing out that he's mobilized the military. He's basically called governors pussies for not being able to handle their own problems. He's blamed mayors, he's blamed governors, everyone but himself. And now he thinks that an overdone military response is the right way to do it. I'm sorry, I may have offended Denise with my
And-
language. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. She's
No.
grabbing her
No,
phone.
I
Pepper
do
spray.
apologize.
I'm an offender. That's what I do. That's why I'm fun, but no.
with his Bible to have photo shoot.
yeah.
So
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, that
it
was
was
fucked up.
upside down. That does tell you
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
So
So,
what-
Chris, you've been at the marches, right? Like,
Yes.
how do you feel because when I read that he was thinking of doing that, it was kind of like, I don't know, one of the just like, wow, this moment's real, because I've been at 3 of the marches and they were peaceful marches. And when I was in Detroit, the only sign of like aggression I saw was when we were met with riot police. And so that scares me a lot because I was surrounded by families. So the idea of this militarization is, I don't know, I feel almost like I can't comprehend it, having been at the march.
Here's what concerns me, okay? We had sheriffs that said, I will not enforce Governor Whitmer's stay-at-home order. They said, my interpretation of the Constitution is such that I don't have to do what the governor tells me to on this particular level. Now those same sheriffs are going to be faced with another constitutional interpretation in their own mind. Do I allow Donald Trump's military equipment to come into my county? Do I think that's a constitutional thing to do? Does it violate the rule of law? Is it correct? Is it legal? I have a feeling, however, that none of those sheriffs that said we hate Governor Whitmer's excuses will stop Donald Trump's machinery from rolling down the streets. I believe those same sheriffs are just going to roll right over and let that happen.
I've seen it. I lived right off of like Greenfield and 10 Mile, but we saw there was an armory on 8 Mile and 67, and those tanks rolled down 8 Mile and then down Woodward. We saw this shit. There's precedence for this shit, okay? You think you can stop if the president orders that can be stopped? Hell no. And you know what they did? They rounded up thousands of people and they put them in cages on fucking Bell Isle. Out there. They didn't have any place to put these people, Leah. Fucking cages on Belle Isle. That shit happens. I don't think that people are going to be pushed into cages this time. I don't believe
No,
that.
that's the
You're
thing.
right.
I think the
No.
escalation will be,
Yeah.
I just, again, I can't really comprehend what it will look like, but I don't think so. I think the escalation will be unprecedented.
That's
I hope as time comes, I hope everything calms down. I really do. Scary. Deb, what are you saying?
But sorry, go ahead, Doug.
No, I was just going to say people have decided to push back. And you see the cops reacting badly because, you know, even under normal circumstances, when people are put under pressure like that, they're going to act badly. But when you take a public servant job like that, you have to expect that. You have to be of a certain temperament to be able to handle this kind of a situation. Unfortunately, the type of temperament that is attracted to these jobs is the exact opposite of that. You know, it's so unfortunate. And like Leah said, everything's going to have to scrub down. And I don't even know where you start and where you end.
Yeah.
But
well, and something I think we could mention is some of these cities that are seeing marches and protests, they're not used to this. So our treasurer from YDM, Duncan McLeod, he lives in Grand Rapids. And he said that Grand Rapids right now looks like a full-on war zone. He said the couple of broken windows over the weekend just like made Grand Rapids freak out because they are not used to seeing tons of huge protests and marches. And then smaller communities like Three Rivers is having marches. And so the response of their like police and their sheriffs could be much different, obviously, than Ann Arbor's.
I don't know. I'm skeptical when I've seen these police taking a knee. They're not taking a knee, and they're not, and maybe with the exception of the dude in Flint, until they're goaded into it. These guys are not like,
You're
you know
right.
what? I'm very skeptical of cops, but this is what I think.
No. I mean, Rick, you're from Flint. Did you feel that was legit?
Well, I do. I actually walked with the sheriff during one of our marches on Sunday night. I will tell you that it was a very genuine. Not only that, the police officers set up a barbecue. They made us hot dogs. They brought bottles of water. Every time the crowd decided to go down a street, even though they had blocked that street, and even though they tried to use their cars to stop us, we still went where we wanted to go, and they never messed with us. They just moved the cars out of the way and then put the barricade 2 more blocks down. They accommodated without hindering, and there was no conflict. That was multi-jurisdictional. I saw county, I saw city, I saw MSP being involved in that. So there was a lot of restraint by a bunch of different things. I'll say this though, I'll take on a police officer kneeling in support, even if it's a momentary expression of support, as opposed to what I saw with people banging their batons against their riot shields, almost goading the crowd, right? I would rather take someone kneeling in support than throwing CS gas, which is tear gas. It's a military term.
That's exactly what I was seeing, was them goading the crowd. I mean, when I was in Detroit, the march was perfectly peaceful. The most intense thing I heard was some vulgarity screamed at the cops. But like Deborah said, you need a certain temperament. You can't get mad because you said a bad word. And it was them that made the first thing and had these smirks and sneers to several people. I mean, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because who's going to win when you're confronted with a cop? He's going to win.
Yeah.
He's got the power.
Oh yeah, I mean, something to note that, and I mean, I don't know if this is true for every march, but we're not showing up with AKs and these things. We're not doing open
Right.
carry. Like, and that's a very different reaction in our state that we have
Yeah.
seen very recently.
Imagine if in Detroit, imagine if Detroit protesters were walking down the street with AK-47s and, you know, just walking down the street, let alone in a Capitol building.
They
All
were-
right. I'll
They
tell
were-
you that a couple of people I marched with in
Yeah.
Flint were
I
strapped.
saw,
No
I
doubt.
saw
Yeah, and
guys
that's
in
what I'm
Detroit,
saying. I don't
but
know
they
how
were
many
white,
people in
but
marches are.
they were strapped.
Hey,
That's not really unusual for the city, though. From where I,
Right,
from,
exactly.
it's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
For me.
Well, I just want to end on by saying the reason why good cops don't get rid of bad cops is because bad cops keep them paid. When we can fix that, we can stop all this madness.
Oh,
which kind of makes them bad cops.
They'll fire.
Yeah.
Right.
fire
Yeah,
a
that-
good
that is
cop.
very
Hey,
true.
so
That is very
you
true.
guys, we're kind of at the end of the segment. We have our next guest. You're welcome to hang out, even be part of the conversation still if you'd like. But for certain, if you have some parting words of wisdom, we'd like to hear it. Where people could donate, where your site, any pertinent information.
Yeah, definitely. We just launched the website. It's Vote Denise Kirchoff. Her last name's kind of hard, so it's Kirchoff. And then we're on Facebook where we keep updated the most, which is Denise Kirchoff for Washtenaw County Commissioner. We do have a donation page. We are trying to do our first literature buy and our yard signs. So we definitely would appreciate any support you can give in that way as well. But also, really keeping just the line of communication open. So pushing out the word, telling them that Denise is here, trying to be a voice for them and someone that they can communicate with directly.
I just like to say, you know what? I got into this race just because actually Leah probably knows it started with the marijuana issue here in
Yeah.
Washtenaw County. I mean, I go to everything and I'm one of those people. I'm a truth to power person. And my husband is always like, because I'm the one yelling at the cop, why did you pull me over? Well, ma'am, I thought, no, tell me why. And he's just like, can you not do that? And I'm not that person. And the problem we had here in Washtenaw County was over our vote count for the issue here was 67 and 89%. But we have a township board that decided that made the statement in an open meeting. They didn't know what they were voting for. Now, mind you, all of these women are white. We know what they need. They don't need this. So we're going to opt out. Okay. And I kept going to the meetings and I said, look, you don't have that right. As an elected official, I'm officially asking you to do your job. Do what voters voted you to do. Well, they don't understand. We know what's best for them. You can look at their meetings. This is sort of the attitude out here. And I kept going and I started putting it on Facebook. And they're like, well, there would be like 4 people at the meeting. And I was on my phone, had Facebook going. And they were like, oh, nobody's here. I'm like, look, I'm on Facebook Live. There's like 400 people. My daughter would be there. She at the time, she was like 16. She's like, I got like 3,000 people. And for some reason, they didn't believe us. And it's like our meeting ended and we have, the community page. People
Yeah.
just went ballistic on them because, all of a sudden they just decided, forget our vote. I mean, I'm a woman of color. When I vote for something, do it. Don't ever take a vote away from me. When I make a decision, I've made it. If I've won, I won. So there was a lot of going back and forth with this township because we're basically, and people don't want to believe this, we're a farming community. I think between Ypsi Township and Superior, there are over 7,000 vacant lands that can be farmed, over 7,000 what we would consider farmlands. And now that election's coming up, all of these people who have voted down recreational marijuana are now all of a sudden going, hey, maybe we could do some processing here. Maybe we could do that. And I'm looking at everybody like, seriously. And they've done no investigation into what recreational marijuana could bring to our community. What owning a business could bring to our community, what micro farming looks like. They've done nothing. And I think on a county level, I will work with this community to force their hand to bring recreational here. enough. When people vote a certain way, you have one job, to go through with what they asked you to do, with what they voted you to do. So that's sort of why I got into the race. I don't like the idea of our elected officials not listening to us.
Right on. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. And I hope things work out really well. And first round is August, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
August 4th is the primary election day.
And people can contribute to your campaign through the website. Is that the best?
Yes,
Yeah.
there's a donation page right there. We're using Act Blue, which most people are familiar with.
Yeah. Vote Denise Kirchoff, 2020.com.
And you're running for Ypsilanti County Commissioner. So people, I'm sorry,
Yep.
Washtenaw County Commissioner. So people in Washtenaw County would be eligible to vote.
Right.
So in two areas, Ypsilanti Township and Augusta Township are able to
Right.
vote.
So
Anyone
it's a
can donate
district.
and volunteer, but specifically, that will be the district she covers.
It's called District 5, which is like where some of our largest open farms are, or where our largest open vacant land is that's going unused.
All the best places to put big cannabis businesses
Hey!
right there in your
Hey!
district.
That's what I'm saying. Well,
Yeah, well, there's lots of state-wide examples of municipalities taking advantage of it. So you certainly have some great places to emulate.
Hey.
Thank you so much for joining us on Jazz Cabbage Cafe today.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank
a lot, you
for
guys.
thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Appreciate
appreciate
it.
it.